Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Project, brains behind the business. It's your front row seat to the business elite. New episodes twice a week.
Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad. I'm Rob Kalwarowsky, and as always, the yang to my yin is here, Susan Hobson. Susan, how are you?
I am pretty high flying. We've had an incredible week this week, right? Launching a bunch of our leadership locker rooms. Brooklyn's back to school. Yeah, the sun is still shining here in Toronto. So I'm feeling great. How about you, buddy?
It's definitely going full steam ahead. And of course, everyone's happy that the kids are out of the house. I don't have that problem, but it's a whole other thing. Now, we have to always start off with a quote. And I have one here. And I'm going to give a shout out to Charlie Matthews for this one. This quote is from the former Alabama head coach, probably the greatest college football coach of all time, Nick Saban. And he says, success will only continue as long as the commitment to the process of being successful remains in place.
I can see why you chose that one, sir. That cuts right to the jugular of everything we're launching in these leadership locker rooms this week, right? That high performance mindset, which is based on a growth mindset, right? Own the process and the outcome will take care of itself.
Absolutely. And of course, our special guest, who better to talk about the process, the process fixer himself, the host of the Process Fixer podcast, Emmy award-winning content creator, four-time author, Derrick Mains is here. Derrick, how are you?
Hi, welcome. You're welcoming me. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here and reconnect with you, Rob, and Susan. Great to connect with you as well. I'm excited to talk to you today. And I love that quote because I'm a firm believer in continuous improvement and why it is so necessary to never get stable in a position, right? To constantly be advancing and sometimes even retreating on your own positions is advancement in and of itself, right? Reestablishing, understanding what success is and being able to work towards it in a really methodical, process-oriented way. That's what I'm all about. So I'm glad to be here.
Amazing, Derrick. And obviously it's great to have you on the show. And we would love to hear a little more about you so you can plug our listeners into all the things you're doing.
Yeah, so I have been in the process game for over 20 years. I have worked across industries, everybody from Fortune 5 and Fortune 10 companies, and helping them establish process and document process and better understand how systems thinking works. And now my work is primarily focused around small to medium-sized businesses, working with executives, trying to get people inside organizations to truly become critical thinkers and systems thinkers, to think about how the work is being done and to to take agency over those things and to affect those things in a positive way. Simon Sinek says every company knows what they do. Some companies know how they do it and fewer still know why. Start with why. Well, it's been 15 years, Simon, and we started with why, and what's next? Well, the next really to me is how. We have to understand how our businesses work, how the sausage is made, and we've got to be able to truly document that, use it as a form of abstraction so that we can look at things, understand how they work together, recognize the interconnectedness, understand the things that are stopping us from accomplishing our goals, and then be able to really move forward as a team in this process that I call shoulder friction. So much of our interaction today is like this. It's face-to-face and it's Zoom and it's through these sort of methods that from an evolutionary biology perspective are not natural to us. 93% of human communication does not come from words. Simon Sinek's I think it was this podcast about a month and a half ago, talked about how emotion in human beings is most closely connected with our ability to smell. So
Mhm.
thinking about that, right? I mean, if smell is that big of an importance in us establishing emotional bonds, and listen, this is not saying what cologne did you wear this morning. This is pheromones. This is us
Yeah.
being able, we are
Chemistry.
animals. Yeah, we are animals. This is the chemistry that happens. So those chemical bonds with us as human beings cannot occur in this environment. And many times we have to get people together to get that shoulder friction, to be able to say, how do we build together? We certainly cannot build face to face. Go try to build a house face to face. That doesn't work. You've got to be standing beside each other and lifting things and building things together as a team. So that's what I'm very passionate about. And that's what I love to talk about. I have over 90 speaking engagements this next year, just talking to executive groups where I'm going in and I'm explaining to them this concept and recognizing that we've got to rethink the ideology that we have around business. We may need to throw some of those old ideas out and bring new, fresh ideas back into the workplace from our history, but also new and fresh ideas about how we should be working and what the next version of capitalism looks like. Is that an intro for you?
That is an intro that I definitely can get behind. I love the passion right off the draw, Derrick. Tell our audience, where does all this passion for process even come from? Let's get
Great.
a little bit further
Yeah.
into the backstory in terms of what inspired you to go on this process-oriented mission.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And we talked about it a little bit in the pre-show, which is where I grew up. And I grew up as in the northern part of the Appalachians, very, very impoverished town, actually still considered the poorest town in Pennsylvania, was destroyed by floods multiple times. That was pretty much our claim to fame. And, I grew up in a very blue collar town with very blue collar people. And I experienced throughout my life the struggles of really the lower middle class. And I recognized that when I was in that environment, digging ditches in my 20s and, doing landscaping and these kind of things, I realized that the people around me did not work for the joy of work. They didn't even like what they did. They were only there for two reasons: fear and finance. That was it. And I really became passionate when I became passionate about process and I started breaking out into my own and getting into leadership. I realized that there's another reason to go to work. See, I always thought it was only fear and finances. You don't want to be homeless and you want to eat. I did not understand that there were people that actually like to go to work, that want to work. And I really believe that if we could figure out a way as a society to get people to want to work, to enjoy their work, to find joy in their work, to be passionate about their work, imagine how much more we could accomplish as a society. When we, as the leaders, have to use fear and finance to motivate people, that is not a great motivation whatsoever. People will do what you ask them to do. Will they do it well? Absolutely not. Will they take shortcuts? Of course they will. Will they leave at the drop of a hat if some place offers a little bit less fear and a little bit more finance? Yeah, they will. So for me, it really came from my upbringing. I didn't go to college. I didn't meet anybody that went to college till I was 25 years old. I actually went to a religious school, so none of my teachers went to college. Like, that just wasn't even an option from where I grew up. So when I came out of that and I began to meet people that were passionate about work, that loved what they did, that were building things, I really got encouraged. And I said, I believe work needs to be rescued. I think it is trapped in the mundane. It is trapped in the busy work. And someone needs to be its superhero and its advocate. And, look at this face. This looks like the guy that's going to save the whole freaking thing. So I just figured, if nobody else is going to do it, I might as well try it myself.
So Derrick,
Love that
I mean, of
answer.
No
course-
ego
of
about
course
this at
we-
all, as you can tell. Yeah.
yeah. Derrick, of course, we love this, but I want to talk about, you're saying that there's a new way to do capitalism. Tell me more about that.
So I think it is yet to be discovered, but there's a great philosopher that I've been following, Slavoj Zizek. He is a Polish philosopher that was raised under communism in the Soviet controlled bloc. And he's been out on the scene now for a few years, and I love the way he thinks, because he will challenge your ideas, and you will hear one talk with him, and at the end of it, you're like, I'm convinced. And then his next talk is completely destroying his last talk and is like, none of that makes any sense. You'd be a moron to believe it. And you're like, what just happened? I love those kind of things. But Zizek says that every one of us can think of 10 ways that the world will end in the next 10 years. I mean, here in the United States, there's 4 or 5 that are possible before we get off this call. I mean, there's lots of things, negative things happening. But yet, if I ask a leader and I say, oh, what will replace capitalism? What will be next? We just freeze. We can't imagine a world beyond capitalism. And this is not to say that there's anything wrong with capitalism, but how can I improve something if I have no aim, no vision, no ability to see something beyond it? How do I advance something that I can't see beyond? So I believe that we have to start thinking beyond the version of capitalism we have right now. We have to recognize that there's a lot of amazing aspects to it, but there is also a byproduct from it that is not really great. So instead of replacing capitalism, let's look at what work 2.0 is, or capitalism 2.0 is. And I believe there are lessons in history. There is actually a time in American history, in world history, where we actually did things completely and totally different for 5 years, particularly in the United States. We threw out the entire old system and we replaced it with new ideas. And during that time, our GDP went up 300%, corporate profits doubled, frontline wages doubled for employees, and unemployment rate fell to 1.5%. And the funny part about that is that period of time from 1942 to 1947, as a man, we have to understand that world was a little bit different. This was the world of Rosie the Riveter. This was the world where women were actually the ones doing the work in the field.
Right.
We were out fighting the war.
Yeah.
But let me tell you, at the end of the war, the head of production for the U.S., Knudsen, who was the general of production over the U.S., said, we won because we smothered our enemies in production. We didn't win because we were better on the battlefield. We won because we out-engineered them. We outbuilt them. These women built better munitions. They built better tanks. They built better planes. And eventually, our enemies understood we can't beat American women. Like they're just going to keep beating us. So we just better give this whole thing up. So it's fascinating that this moment in time, this 5 or 6 years that's enshrined in our memory of this amazing moment where America, and people forget, 1939, we were the 39th largest military in the world. The US was. We were not a military power. We had 50,000 men riding on horses. That was our claim to fame in 1939. And yet 7 years later, the entire world sees the United States as this global domineering power that is dictating what's going to happen on the world stage. And certainly we don't want to downplay what those men did. Right? But the reality is none of them could have done that. Grandpap couldn't have won the war if grandmother wasn't in the factory making these things happen. So there was, because at that moment in time, 40% of the US workforce was either drafted or volunteered. So could you imagine going into your business tomorrow and 40% of your people are gone and it's your best people? And listen, the people that were recruited first was anybody with a manager or director title, because we needed sergeants and captains and lieutenants and colonels. And so imagine walking into your business tomorrow, 40% of the people are gone and all of your management team is gone. And it's just you and a bunch of women and kids, because people forget at 12 years old, you could drop out during the war and go to work in a factory. 3 million kids went to work in factories in the US. So imagine you as a CEO rolling in and thinking, now we've got to beat fascism. We've got to out-engineer the Germans and the Italians. We've got to do all of this incredible work. Let's get started. And you look out and it's women and children who've never worked in these environments before. Women at that time, they didn't know what a wrench was. They didn't know what a hammer was. That wasn't the way we taught our children at that point. So there is a moment in time where capitalism actually worked in a completely and totally different way. And it was significantly more successful than what we have today. But yet, starting in 1948, the US rejected that as ideals. And by 1950, they were considered to be communistic and Marxist. And those ideas were shipped off to Japan. And the Japanese spent the next 20 years absolutely mutilating us in manufacturing and production and innovation, because they took the ideas that we threw in the garbage bin and they just said, how about we'll just take your garbage and we'll just make the second biggest economy of the world, from complete total 95% devastation of the Japanese mainland to becoming the second largest manufacturing and GDP in the world in 20 years through our throwaway ideas. So maybe we should consider going back to the garbage bin and saying, since we found a significantly better system at some point that we know produces way better results financially and results for people and results for the output, maybe, just maybe, we should consider those ideas as a foundation for what we build the next version of capitalism on. Can you tell I'm a son of a preacher? Could you tell there?
Totally on your
I thought you were
soapbox,
going to
and
say,
I love it.
they've already tried the idea of starting more wars to keep the economy going.
Yeah, that's not the solution, right? I mean, starting
Definitely
more,
not.
but there is a moment in time, this moment, where gentlemen like Schuhart and Deming, who created this incredible new version of how we would run our organizations. Because let's not forget, not only were we fighting Nazis, but we were fighting German and Italian engineers. Anybody that knows anything about precision manufacturing, that's the scariest thing to ever have to go up against, is when you got to race a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. You're like, I'm a Ford engineer. Let me rethink these things, right? So we weren't just fighting on the battlefield. This war was waged on manufacturing floors and in businesses around the world. And the work was not done by people that looked like me. I mean, it was done by really unskilled workers at that time, because women were not trained in this type of work. But we learned, you go and watch the training videos from World War II on YouTube. I dare you, if you're in learning development, to do it. You will find a way within about 20 minutes, a completely and totally different way of training that is about 30 times more effective than what you use right now. But again, those have been archived and mothballed, and we're like, that's old-timey stuff. We don't want to do all that stuff. Just because it's way more efficient and way more profitable, we don't want to do those things.
What is the secret sauce and the connection to process and leadership that was embedded in this moment of time and history?
I'm so glad you asked, because in 1941, there was a book written called the U.S. War Standards. There were 6 or 7 statisticians that came together working with the administration in the U.S., and they wrote a book, The Standards on How They Would Handle Military Production During War. Interestingly enough, that elements of that book were secrets. They were literally military secrets. And the military secret is so simple that it's almost laughable. And all it is an XY axis, and they put time on the bottom and what they want to measure on the side, and they continuously plotted what they were doing every single day. Anytime something fell outside of the normal range, they went and investigated it. Why did that happen? How can we fix that? How can we improve it? If something was better than the normal range, what happened today? Why? Now, wait a second. Susan did more work in this shift than last shift. Why? Oh, well, we changed the lighting buffer. Wait a second. Does changing the lighting affect Susan's work? Let's try that again. It was a constant experiment every single day. And every person on the floor knew how to do these little XY axes and to plot things out. And they could go to their boss and they could say, hey, look, I just observed something. I just observed that when this occurred, look at how it affected our production rate. Look at how the quality improved. Should we try that again? Yeah, let's try that again. And they would experiment and they would find things. And so the second piece of that was this. When Deming and Schuhart and those gentlemen went in to help with the manufacturing, and they walked into rooms with all of these women and all of these children, they realized that they couldn't manage the old way. So statistical control is one thing, this XY axis. The other thing that they found is a gentleman like Ford, the CEO of Ford at the time. There's a story of him walking down the line and watching these women work, and he's shaking his head and he's just like disgusted. He's like, this is never going to work. And one woman walks up to him and she says, Mr. Ford, hold up your hand. And he holds up his hand and she holds up hers and she says, my hand's half the size of yours. How about you shuffle on out of here, get me some tools that fit my hands, then come back and tell me that I'm not a good worker. And Ford sort of, taken aback, but he goes and does that. And then he looks at his little statistical control chart the next day and he goes, oh, production rates went up by 20%. Maybe I should go back down to the line, right? And then they say, look at the size of these gloves. We're gonna lose a finger because our gloves are too big. And he said, oh yeah, that's a great idea. A woman got her hair cut in a machine yesterday. Why don't you go get us hair ties? Okay, he goes and gets, and every day he looks at his chart and he goes, well, son of a gun, it works. Oh, working with the frontline people, removing their pain in the process, and hearing from we call this class of workers the believables. They are the people at the front line of the organization. We call them the hands. They also, I don't know if you've noticed this, but 100% of people working have both hands and heads. At the same time, we don't just have hands, right? We're not just we actually have a thinking function that exists above this. So what Deming at that time realized is that, wait a second, the only people that really know how to make things better in this factory are not the people up in the office looking at their dashboards and charts. It's the actual people doing the work. So this is where this concept in Japan after the war, they called it the Gemba walk. It's a requirement of all management to physically peel their ass from their seat twice a day, go down, walk amongst the people doing the work, not from a criticality perspective, but a perspective of saying, hey, how would you improve that? If we had more resources, what would you do here? How would you, getting people's brains working? So that combination of statistical control and employee empowerment, when this idea got shipped over to Japan after the war, because Deming was outright rejected here. He went to Japan and spent 30 years there teaching them all of these secrets. When that happened, at the end of the war in 1951, the Japanese were producing 4 cars per employee in the automobile industry. The Americans were doing 10 cars per employee. Within 20 years, the Japanese were producing 60 cars per employee. The Americans were still producing 10. So I didn't say 16, I said 60. So think about that same head count, getting thousands of percentage more output from those people, all because statistical control, every day measuring what's happening and say, what could we do better? They used a method called quality circles in Japan, where every week, every department met and they said, what did we learn this week? How will we make it better next week? What's the one thing that we could do that will make the work better and easier and a higher quality next week? Then they implement that idea. Then the next Friday, they all sit down again. What did we learn? It is a learning environment that we need. And that's what Capitalism 2.0 really means to me. It's this ability of combining those two things together, like we did during the war, and taking, listen, right now we're all operating in 20th century businesses that are based upon ideology from the 20th century, but we're using 21st century technology to go faster. How about let's just stop for a second and like create a new 22nd century model of what business and management should look like, and then let the technology catch up to it versus the opposite of what we're doing right now.
Woo!
I hope that makes sense.
So good, and definitely makes sense. So when you're coming in to speak to these 90 speaking engagements full of executive leaders, what is it that you are laying out for them as that 2024 blueprint, right? Or roadmap in terms of how we can actually learn from our history, which is something I feel like we're still trying to figure out here in North America, but that's a whole other podcast.
At least you both are in different countries. Here in the US, you're right. It just seems like, well, and listen, let's think about this for a moment. So your question was, how do I deliver this message? Well, some of it is giving that story that I just gave and really showing them numbers and showing there's literally a better way. And it is not a better way because it was designed that way. Certainly the statistical control chart was a real innovation, but the real catalyst of things was managers, executives walking down and talking to the frontline people, not using the folks underneath them that listen, as a CEO, the people that report to me, if I think about the things that they ask me for, it's all resources. I need more people. I need more money. I need more this. I need more this. When you walk out to the front line, what you hear is, hey, why is this happening? Like, does this make any, why are we getting the wrong material? Like, it's really simple, easy to fix things. And so that's really what I try to show them. I also want to show them that to me, it's about a wrong ideology that came into play around 1950. And listen, I don't want to knock Drucker, but Drucker had a lot to do with this. Jack Welch had a lot to do with this. When these men came back from the war, They were used to the command and control methodology. Managers were used to saying, you do this, and employees were used to saying, sir, yes, sir. There was no conversation. These were soldiers that were defending positions. And they came back into the factories and they defended their positions. What we had before the war, these women instead operated like scouts. They were on the front line, seeing the things that were happening, raising their hand and saying, this doesn't make sense. The CEO of the whole entire company walks by and says, how's it going today? You seeing anything we can improve? And you go, yeah, come here, let me show you. Right? That is they were scouts. And if you've ever, a scout in the military might be a low-level position, but they talk directly to the general. Because the general's like, I want to hear from the people that are on the battlefield. So that is what I try to show them. I also try to show them that many of the ideologies they have are actually misstatements and they're incorrect. Their belief structure about how they run their organizations is they adopted someone else's idea without truly understanding what that idea means. Great example is this. One of the things I do in workshops is I will have 5 or 6 CEOs line up and I will whisper to the first one and I will say, every third Thursday, the kittens eat chicken in the kitchen, pass it on. And they pass it on. And by the time it gets to the end, it's hilarity, right? Because it's become so distorted and everybody's laughing about it. And then I say to them, what is the name of that game? And everybody in unison says, it's the telephone game. And I say, no. That game is called on-the-job training. Buddy, and they pass it on and they pass it on and they pass it on. And now you wonder why you don't get the right result. You don't get the right result because what you said at the beginning got diffused through 10 freaking layers of management out to a group of people that looked at that. And by the time it got to them, it sounded so foreign and it was so different from any intention that you had that what do they say? If you've ever worked in a frontline employee job, what happens your first day? They train you, you show up the first day at the location and you say, I've been trained. And they say, throw all that junk in the garbage. None of that matters. We don't do any of that crap around here. Ignore everything that you were told. We'll show you how the job's done. That's why you have these terrible results because you think, oh, I'll just hire somebody and throw them into the lion's den. And let's hope that somehow the copy of the copy of the copy of the copy of the copy will make a better copy than the last one. If you were ever around copy machines in the 80s and 90s, you know that every time you make a copy of it, it gets substantially worse. So stop doing that. Stop doing that. This ideology that we must work on our business, not in our business, is actually false because Michael Gerber has spent his entire career saying, please, for the love of God, map out your processes, systematize your business so that you earn the right to work on it, not in it. And yet we just took Michael Gerber's book, ripped out 99.9% of the pages and said, ooh, look at this little sentence. I'm going to keep that and I'm going to throw away all the pre-work and the 2 or 3 years it takes to get to that part of the book where he says those things. So that's what I go out and talk to them about. I need them to understand that what they believe. And listen, when you're a CEO, rarely do people tell you that you're wrong or even show you that you're wrong. So when I do workshops, I will have CEOs come up to me afterwards that, well, I just did two this week in Boise. I've had 3 CEOs reach out to me and said, I am unable to sleep. You have ruined me because now I'm thinking back and I'm going, that person I fired last year, was it me? Like, oh my God, wait, I thought it was them. But now that I look at my system and I realize how inefficient it is, and I look around and I realize we never trained this person correctly and we never gave them a voice and they kept asking a lot of questions. And I was like, I don't like people that ask questions. Let's fire that person. Now I'm sitting here going, oh my God, I may have ruined that person's life. And I'm the one that was the problem in the whole thing. So we have to remember what our grandmother told us, right? When you point the finger at somebody, you got 3 pointing back at yourself. So I love this idea. And it's one of the other things that I teach, and I know I'm talking a lot here, but the first rule of Japanese management, one of the things that Deming taught when he went to Japan is that employees cannot make mistakes. If a mistake occurs, it is always the result of a system or process management is implemented incorrectly. There is never a chance for you to make a mistake in this company. If you make a mistake, it must be my fault. Now, are there idiots out there? Yes, there are idiots out there. But let's work that every time we have somebody that makes a mistake, instead of blaming the person, let's just improve the system. And if we just keep doing that over and over and over and over, eventually the system becomes so good that you can hire United States congressmen if you wanted to. I mean, you could go that low on the intellectual scale to be able to hire American politicians. I mean, the bottom of the barrel.
Oh my God.
Right. This is where the dregs of society, you could go that far and hire those morons. So not that you want to hire morons, not that you want to hire idiots, but if you had the option to not have to hire the best, but instead be able to hire somebody and create a system for them that makes them the best. I ran a manufacturing facility a few years ago, and I had a number of people. We had a little bit of a shakeup with some management, and I had a number of people leave. And within 6 months, all of them came back. They didn't come back crawling back to me. I called them after 6 months and I said, hey, Susan, I know you worked here. Rob, I know you worked here. I know there was a little bit of a rough patch. How's it going at your new job? And they were like, you know what? It's not great. I don't really like it. I loved working there better. Well, then why don't you come back? And I brought them back. And a number of them confided in me and they said, you know, I thought I was a rock star here. And then I went someplace else and I wasn't a rock star. And then I wondered, am I the rock star or was the system that you created the rock star? You talked about college football coaches. Is it the player or is it the coach in the system? It's a combination of things. It's not always just the best player. It requires the system. So if you're a good coach, you can't say, oh, my players lost the game. Every NFL coach, if you start blaming players, the media immediately turns on you and everybody's like, this guy's out of here. Blame yourself. Take the responsibility and say, I need to improve my system. And listen, we want good people. We want all those kind of things. But for God's sakes, stop blaming other people for your freaking problems. And I know I'm talking a lot, so I'm going to let you guys talk now. Sorry.
No,
you don't take the son of a preacher and ask him a question like that. You're setting them up.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do, Derrick. That was nothing but gold flowing out of you.
There you go. Rob, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And it's like one of my friends in industry, Bob Latino, he's probably the world's foremost expert on root cause analysis. And he's done it for 50 years. And one time we were at a conference together in Memphis and I was like, Bob, you know, how many times have you seen like a deliberate act of sabotage or someone saying, you know what, like screw these guys, I'm making the wrong decision? He was like, one time. And they call him in for like the biggest disasters, explosions, safety incidents, things that cost millions, tens of millions of dollars. He's the guy they call one time in 50 years. And it's exactly what you said, dude.
Yeah.
It's not the person, it's what was the business process that led to that person making the decision in that moment and thinking that was the best decision or the only decision they could make.
Yeah. Or not thinking at all. You know, that's the other challenge. In Japan, one of the techniques that they use is this called point and call. And the point and call system is really interesting because how it really came about is the Japanese were having a problem. I don't know if you've ever been to Japan. I have not. I need to go sometime. But the Japanese train system runs down to the 10th of a second. So you can set your watch to it. There's a joke in Japan that if you're on a tour bus and you mail a postcard to yourself back at your hotel, there's like a 98% chance it will be there before the tour bus can make it back. Like 90-minute mail delivery is so. But what they found is this: they were in the train stations, the subway stations. They have doors on both sides, and we've all seen how the Japanese pack into these trains, right? Occasionally, an operator would make a mistake and open the wrong door. And because of the number of people in there, people would fall out onto the tracks and be injured. And they tried all sorts of methods. They tried all sorts of things. But the way that the system was set up, some stations it's this side, some stations it's this side. So it was very confusing. And they tried all sorts of things. And eventually they came up with this point and call technique. And all it is this: when the driver enters the station, they point at the sign for the station. And on each sign, it says exit right or exit left. They point at it and they yell the name of the station and what side they exit. That single act completely eliminated anybody ever making a mistake again, because we went from being hands, right? We're just hands operating, doing our training, to being forced to be heads for a moment. And we look up and we said, you know, this station, right-hand exit, and then we press the button. That is now used all over Japan for all sorts of things where they want precision. In surgeries, if they're doing a surgery on somebody, the surgeon yells out, spleen, This is the surgery we're doing. I'm using my right hand. And everybody there goes, okay, great. Now we're all paying attention. We're all checking your work instead of going, well, he's the surgeon. He knows what he's doing. I mean, we just had a case here in the US where they took like somebody's liver out or something. And it was like some other surgery and the guy died. Right. But by yelling it out, it seems silly, but I had them do it when I had the Fat Scooters factory. When they were placing an order, they had to physically yell out what they were doing. We are building this item in this color with this color fenders and these accessories. And then somebody else would have to go, yes, we are building. And they would say it out loud. And everybody thought it was silly. We made zero mistake. We didn't have to quality check our work because our work was done right the first time. Didn't require all that QC, all those kind of things. I like to say this, that, here in the US, at least, we spend about a third of our time waiting, checking, and looking. These are the functions of management: waiting on things, checking on things, looking on things. Anytime we use words like status update or inspect or review, all those words are saying is, I do not trust my process, and I absolutely do not trust the people in it. Because if I did, I would not have to do all of those extra tasks. So this is what we want to do. We want to try to make our organizations more efficient. It might seem silly. It might sound funny when you make people call something out like that. But if it improves your quality, if it makes the experience better, if it engages people's heads, well, you'd be a fool not to do it. Might look dumb, but it doesn't mean that it is dumb.
I mean, I'm totally on board with you, Derrick. I often point and yell at my clients.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, that's a good technique for not having clients for very long, right? You got to break that ideology. That's the hardest part for us, is we believe that the lessons from last year are okay for this year. And look at our top 10 movies right now. All of them are remakes. All of them are sequels. Look at last year's top 10 movies. All of them are remakes. All of them are sequels. There's no new ideas out there. Taylor Swift's Eras Tour. There's no new material. It's all the old material. Eminem has a hit album right now. Who's his guest star on the album? Slim Shady. The old version of Eminem. Like, nobody has any new ideas. So we're going to have to go back. And I truly believe if we look at that time in history around World War II, there were some incredible things that came out of that. Lean came out of it. Six Sigma came out of it. Agile came out of it. One-page plans came out. All of these different methods came out of this one nugget that occurred during this time. So instead of building off those nuggets, why don't we just go back, instead of building off those branches, go back to the original, read about this stuff. I'm reading an incredible book by Malcolm Gladwell right now called The Bomber Mafia. It's fascinating. It's a story about World War II. I'm not a World War II guy, but I love looking at that time and them talking about how they figured out how to create precision bombs and how they dialed that in each and every day and looked at all the lives that were going to be affected by it. Like, thinking about that, you're in the job of figuring out how to make more efficient bombs. The people who figured out how to make the most efficient bombs were the humanitarians that wanted to save people's lives. Like, they knew we're going to drop a bomb anyways. Do we want to drop it in the center of Tokyo and kill thousands of women and children? Or do we want to drop it right on the military command? So, going back to those ideas, those things that we learned because that forge of that time forced us to learn it, and going back to those core central ideas and say, this isn't history. This is actually a foundational idea where an experiment was performed in this market for 4 or 5 years where things were done totally differently, and they got a result that was significantly better than anything we have seen since that time. Maybe there's a nugget in there someplace we can take out.
Amazing. Obviously,
we are like over time. I can't believe it. I told you not to let me talk like this. Rob, I'm not going to blame you. Susan, this has to be your fault. No, it's the system's fault. We're going to blame the system.
It's a broken system.
Hey, I'm a 2.0 leader. I'll take that accountability. I was listening to your riff.
There you go. Right.
I feel like this is a loaded question for you, Derrick, considering you're such a process-oriented guy. But have you ever thought of what you want the legacy of all of this fervent passion you have for teaching people about this foundational ideology around owning the process?
Yeah, I think it's really, and I'm looking back at the signs on the back of my door that remind me of all of these kind of things of why I do this. But it really is about rescuing work is the key. And I really do believe that I want people 50, 100 years from now to be able to look back like we should be doing with what happened in World War II. and what create. I want them to look back at 2025, 2026 and say, there was a pivotal change in the way that we operated our businesses. You know, the reason that you work a 40-hour work week is because Ford discovered that the same amount of production happens in 5 days than 6 days. So the only reason we have a 40-hour work week is because Ford was like, I can shut the factory down and save all this electricity. So, you know, DuPont in the 50s and 60s actually found a much better way to work. A lot of people don't know. It's called the DuPont schedule. You work 10 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 weeks, and then you get 1 week off per month. DuPont did it for 10 years. It was radically more efficient than anything else anybody had ever discovered up to that moment in time. It was safer. They got better production. They had no call outs. Think about that. If a company hired you and say, oh, by the way, you get 1 week off every single month, you're like, okay. Like that's a different way. So I really hope that we can make an impact on what business looks like 50 or 100 years from now, that somebody in a podcast, 50 or whatever we call them at that point, maybe it's just a Neuralink transfer into your brain, but somebody transfers information into business leaders' brain that says there was a moment in time when we reassessed history, when we reassessed what we did in our ideology as leaders, and we actually took stock and we said, these things can be retired. Let's mothball those. Let's take these ideas, let's couple them with this technology and these sort of fundamental principles about how humans want to live and work. And we combine those things together. And today we live a better life. Because I think people in the 18th and 19th century, if they looked at the life we live today, they would be like, dang, I want people 100 years from now to feel that way about us and be like, could you imagine they actually had to like do work and physically move around and things? It's like, oh, it's so creepy. Like, but that would be amazing to make that kind of impact on the world. And that's what my hope is. And thanks for giving me a vehicle to do that. Talk to people about it.
No, thank you for joining us on the show. And for everyone who's listening right now, whatever platform you're listening to, just search Process Fixer Podcast, hit subscribe. You'll be able to hear more from Derrick there. Obviously, you can head on over to his website, theprocessfixer.com. And I've dropped his LinkedIn in the podcast notes as well. Derrick, is there anywhere else you want folks to find you?
Well, that's about it. I mean, if you're in Vistage, I don't know, is Vistage a thing? I guess it is in Canada. It's called Tech in Canada, but I do a lot of Vistage talks. I've got a whole bunch of those coming up with the national conference, some webinars. I'll be out at a lot of those CEO groups. So if you're a Vistage member, look for me because I'm out on the circuit regularly out giving these workshops. And it's a lot of fun to go out and talk about these kind of things. And again, my hope is that this message can be amplified by folks like you, and that we all, I don't think of anybody that I've talked to disagrees with this message, right? It's just the how now. We have to figure out how to get it in play. But no, I think you got it. Processfixer.com is the best place to find me. And thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. And obviously for executive coaching, leadership development, DEI, and more, head on over to elitehighperformance.com for all of that. Susan, where would you like to land the plane with us today?
I feel like it's a full circle moment from where we started, gentlemen, with that quote. Now we see why us here at Team Elite are so focused on this mission of changing the way the game of leadership's being played through this growth mindset, through this continuous improvement thing that we've been riffing on today. I feel like Derrick really makes the case for how that all starts with these foundational ideologies and belief systems, which is also why we go to that step of depth in terms of our leaders' development, right? In terms of developing those 2.0 belief structures in and around the growth mindset. Thank you, Derrick, for making that case, because I feel like here in 2024, this is something our leaders are still trying to figure out, how to let go of trying to control the outcomes, right? And trust that when they own the process, the best outcomes will take care of themselves.
Absolutely. And for me, it gets back to one thing that Derrick mentioned about courage. And it's the courage to step and change your beliefs, and the courage to admit that you might not be doing everything perfectly. And that's a really incredible hard step to make for a lot of folks. But that's where the opportunity lies. And it's that Einstein quote. If you do the same thing over and over and over again, that's the definition of insanity. So take that courage, look at yourself, change what you're doing, get that new process, and you'll get results just like Nick Saban. Derrick, thank you so much for joining us. It was amazing to have you on the show. I'm looking forward to joining you on your show. And then also we're going to have you back, probably do like a 2-hour spot.
Let's do it. I'm happy to. We'll do it in Costa Rica next time. That's easier.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Done.
Excellent. Thank you both.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And everyone,
Derrick.
thank you so much for listening. And we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.